By the time we get to May, which is when they're going to be able to really get at each other once the ground firms up, the Ukrainians will have 60,000 new troops who have been trained across NATO countries coming in with a lot of the newer gear. And it's going to be a very mobile force trained to Western standards. It's going to be completely different from anything the former Soviet Union has ever seen. But the Russians are going to be into their second mobilization. When they started the war, there were 100,000 Russians in Ukraine. Now there's closer to 250,000. And by the time we get to May, it's probably going to be closer to 600,000. So for every tank the West has donated to Ukraine, the Russians are bellying up with an extra 5,000 troops. This is going to be a very, very different conflict.
Ukraine's response to Putin's brutal aggression has been superb, surprising even the enemy itself. This truly is a David versus Goliath story, and David is defying Goliath's attempt to erase his country from the map. Now the tide is turning. Ukraine is planning to take back the territory one by one through its new counteroffensive. One key objective for Ukraine, and perhaps an early sign of success, would be to break the so-called land bridge between mainland Russia and occupied Crimea, severing crucial supply lines to Russian troops in Zaporizhzhia region and isolating Russian bases on the peninsula. Another top imperative is to regain control over hugely valuable critical infrastructure facilities, including the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, Europe's largest atomic energy station, which is located in the occupied city of Enerhodar, and the Kakhovka hydroelectric plant in the southern Kherson region. The huge front line creates numerous potential avenues of attack. Ukraine could focus its efforts south and attempt to seize the city of Melitopol, which Russia has established as the occupied regional capital of Zaporizhzhia, and then push forward in an effort to sever the land bridge. Ukraine could also attack Crimea itself, probably with naval operations and possibly even beach landings. Satellite imagery shows extensive trenches the Russian forces have dug in preparation for a potential assault. Other scenarios could see the Ukrainians attacking east to the fiercely embattled city of Bakhmut, or from the town of Kupiansk in a push to regain control of areas in Luhansk region. The offensive will not only liberate villages and cities, but also cut logistic chains of Russian troops and reduce their offensive capacity.
These soldiers are going to be badly equipped, badly led, with low morale and horrible logistics behind them, but there's still more than 500,000 of them. So as Stalin was fond of saying, quantity is a quality all its own. And every single Russian war in history, the first year of it has looked like what we've seen. It's been a logistical disaster with high casualties. And then in the second year, they rally to the cause and they throw bodies at the problem until it goes away. And in about half of their wars, that works just fine.
The Russians have challenges of their own. Since the beginning of the invasion, there have been major doubts about the basic competence of Russian commanders and their supply of well-trained soldiers, artillery shells, and equipment. The Russians have expended many of their cruise missiles, lost thousands of people in Bakhmut alone, and drained their stores of ammunition much faster than they can replace them with their domestic production. But Russia is working to address those gaps. Russian troops have honed their abilities to use drones and artillery to target Ukrainian forces more effectively. They've recently started using glide bombs, which use gravity and basic guidance devices to reach their targets without making any noise, to show they are still capable of deploying newer weapons on the battlefield. The effort means the window to make significant gains against Russia's depleted forces may not remain open indefinitely. In private meetings, Sergei Shoigu, the Russian defense minister, has told other officials that he believes Russia has a numerical advantage on the battlefield because it has more planes, tanks, artillery pieces, and soldiers than Ukrainians, according to a senior European official aware of the discussions. In these conversations, Mr. Shoigu came across as supremely confident that Russia will eventually prevail.
Something like an economic recession or depression, which we really have not seen yet in Russia, is not going to slow them down at all. They have 70 years of Soviet legacy to burn through, 50 years of Soviet legacy to burn through. And yes, they're burning through it at a fast rate, but they've only recently really started to spin up their military industrial complex. So I don't think they're going to run out anytime soon. They discovered that the equipment that they were buying for the North Koreans wasn't all that, because, artillery shells after a couple of decades kind of degrade, and the North Koreans were giving them the really old stuff, so that's probably tapped out. In the case of Iran is not capable of mass production of their suicide drones. So the discussion now is to build a facility within Russia that can mass manufacture Iranian technology, which is just hilarious to say that out loud. But that's where we are. The big question is China. Now, in a sane universe where China is interested in its national and economic survival and success, the Chinese wouldn't even consider this. But that's not the world we're in. Chairman Xi has so purged the Chinese system of anyone who's capable of conscious thought that it is now just him. And in a cult of personality governing system, all it takes is some dumbass bureaucrat to think that doing this will stick it to the United States' eye, and so that is what the great leader wants, and to send a few cargoes of weapons. And I'm very concerned that that's exactly what's going to happen this year.
Iran has solidified its role as Russia's wartime arms supplier as Russian forces facing battlefield losses intensify their attacks on Ukraine's civilian population and infrastructure. Last summer, Iran began delivering drones that loiter, then explode on impact with a target for Russian use in Ukraine, according to the US officials. Ukraine and its Western partners expect that Iran will send Russia the Fateh 110, a mobile short-range ballistic missile, and Zulfagar, a Fateh variant. Russia is also looking to North Korea for weapons and munitions to fuel the war in Ukraine, this time in a deal that would provide Pyongyang with much-needed food and other commodities in return. As part of this proposed deal, Russia would receive over 24 kinds of weapons and munitions from Pyongyang. Experts believe that the food situation in North Korea is the worst it has been under Kim Jong-un's 11-year rule, but see no signs of imminent famine or mass deaths. Kim has vowed to strengthen trade control over agriculture and take a spate of other steps to increase grain production, North Korean state media reported earlier this month. China is also secretly supplying Russian forces. Recently, Ukrainian forces are finding a growing number of components from China in Russian weapons used in Ukraine, a senior advisor in President Vladimir Zelensky's office said to news agency. China has repeatedly denied sending military equipment to Russia since Moscow's all-out invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Intelligence gathered by Ukrainian experts from the battlefield and shared with Reuters stated that Chinese-made components were found in a navigation system in Orlan aerial drones that had previously used a Swiss system. The experts also reported finding Chinese parts in the fire control system in Russian tanks that had earlier used French-made parts. Earlier, the US added the Chinese components to its latest sanctions, including a satellite image reseller that the State Department said supplied imagery of locations in Ukraine to entities affiliated with Wagner and its head, Yevgeny Prigozhin.
Realize now that there is no technological future. Biden has killed that. There is no energy future because the Russians are killing that. And there is no financial future because they have killed that themselves with their housing market. They realize that their whole system now is teetering on the edge. And the question is, what's going to push it over? And they really, really need to ratchet it down if they're going to have a chance here. Because if the Americans are not part of the solution, there is no solution for them. We control the sea lanes. We control the energy in the agricultural markets. We're their largest consumer base. We're the source of most of their technology. They have to have a relationship. But they had come to that conclusion, and then the balloon fiasco happened. So the ability of the decision-making apparatus in China to make basic functionality of the system, that's now gone.
The Chinese real estate sector accounts for around 30% of China's GDP, making it a crucial contributor to the country's economic growth. The 100 largest developers ended 2022 with 7.6 trillion yuan, about US $1.1 trillion in sales, down 41.3%, according to the China Index Academy. According to the National Bureau of Statistics, in 2021, the total sales of commercial residential buildings in China amounted to approximately 16.3 trillion yuan, around 2.5 trillion US dollars. There is a growing concern about the level of debt held by Chinese property developers. According to a report by S&P Global Ratings, China's top 200 property developers had a debt-to-asset ratio of 78% in 2022. The high level of debt held by Chinese developers has led to concerns about a potential real estate bubble in China and the risk of a systematic financial crisis that can engulf all of Asia-Pacific. Many of China's largest property developers face a liquidity crisis and are on the brink of defaulting on its debt, which the CCP government is trying to avoid. According to Zeihan, China's tech dominance is also not sustainable due to several factors. First, China's tech companies are heavily reliant on the state for funding, which could limit innovation and entrepreneurship. Second, the ongoing trade tensions between China and the US could hamper China's access to cutting-edge technologies. Third, China's authoritarian system could deter foreign talent and investments from entering the country. Similarly, China's energy future is precarious due to its heavy reliance on imported energy. According to him, China imports 70% of its oil and 40% of its natural gas, which makes it vulnerable to supply disruptions and price shocks. Moreover, he argues that China's efforts to become more energy independent through initiatives such as the Belt and Road Initiative could prove costly and unsustainable in the long run. Zeihan is pessimistic about China's economic future, citing several reasons. First, he argues that China's economic growth is unsustainable due to its demographic challenges, such as an aging population and decline in birth rates. Second, he believes that China's debt levels are too high and could lead to a financial crisis in the future. Third, he points out that China's authoritarian political system could deter foreign investment in its real estate sector, which are crucial for sustained economic growth. Xi's grip on Chinese politics is stronger than any leader since Mao Zedong. He has taken steps to centralize power, purge political rivals, and suppress dissent, all in the name of ensuring stability and preserving the party's rule. While his methods have been controversial, there is little doubt that Xi has established himself as one of the most powerful leaders in modern Chinese history.